Loud and Quiet presents Midnight Chats.
I'll get this straight out of the way. I've got a cold, listeners. I've got a cold, but I'm not going to talk about that because there's nothing more boring than hearing somebody talk about being ill or having a cold, especially on a podcast. Welcome to this evening's episode of Midnight Chats, number 45. Thanks to those of you who checked out Stuart's chat with Graham Coxon from Blur last time out. It was great to have him on. We've also got a couple of really good episodes that we've already recorded coming up soon, so we're excited about sharing those with you. If you are joining us for the first time on Midnight Chats, do subscribe if you like what you hear. Do rate us, do comment wherever you're listening to this. Hopefully you like it. I'm not going to waste any time in getting into tonight's episode. Back at the beginning of March, my guest was making a quick stop in London. Craig Finn, the leader of the Hold Steady, came by our office. The Brooklyn band were in town playing 3 shows across 3 nights in the capital, 2 big ones and 1 tiny show. It was an approach they gave a go in New York at the end of 2017. And that seemed to work well for them. They really enjoyed it, so they wanted to give it a go here. They're a group who've been coming to the UK regularly for well over a decade now. Craig talks a bit about their first experiences of being in Europe when their third album, Boys and Girls in America, their real breakthrough, was taking off in 2006. And relatively speaking, the Hold Steady have slowed things down, for them at least, a little bit over the past few years. They released 5 albums in the first 7 years that they were together. But it's been 4 years since their last one, though, Teeth Dreams. Fans will know that Craig doesn't ever sit around twiddling his thumbs. He's always writing, and last year he released his 3rd solo album, We All Want the Same Things, that he took on tour and played a number of different types of shows that he'd never done before. Now, we've got a knack for recording these conversations on occasions which seem to fit with a little bit of history. The final print edition of NME magazine came out on the same day that I sat down with Craig. He mentions that. And it was also the same day that Loud and Quiet, the magazine that we make every month, was relaunched in a new format. So maybe that was just a little footnote in the history of UK music press. You never know. Craig, fans won't be surprised to hear, was a gentleman. We covered a bunch of different subjects during our chat. His attitudes to social media, memories of touring Boys and Girls in America more than a decade ago now, why it's important to look after the band's dedicated fan base that they have, and most importantly, I wanted to know about what he orders as part of a classic British roast dinner. So all of the important stuff covered. So here it is then. I'm off to find some Lemsip. This is Craig Finn from the Hold Steady on Midnight Chats. Enjoy.
Welcome to Midnight Chats. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back to London. Obviously, you've been here many times over the years.
Yeah.
But you're here to play 3 small, intimate shows with the Hold Steady. Tell me about why you're attracted to doing a couple of small shows here. Is it kind of getting back into things after a little bit of time off?
Well, yeah, in some way. I mean, for one, London and the UK in general has been very important to the band for a long time. It's very supportive. And a couple of years ago, well, we didn't do much for a few years, and then we kind of came back a couple of years ago and we booked 4 shows in our hometown of Brooklyn to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Boys and Girls in America. And we did the weekend, and we found that as a model that really it suited us. We liked it. It made sense for several reasons. one is just like not moving the equipment, and having people come to you, kind of.
The convenience
is kind of awesome. Well, I mean, and it's not just because it's easy. It also allows us to sort of focus on the things that I think really matter, which is the music, the set lists. We could play a lot of different songs. Where if you're, driving to the next gig, tearing it down, setting it up, so much of your day goes to that. So it kind of allowed us to kind of focus on the music more. And also, there's been such a community around the Hold Steady with the fans for since we started, really. It allowed us to get people together and, do different shows each night and have, like people would go to, bar, pub after, and there, there's certain these things with the fans that took on its own life that is almost aside from us. So we really liked those weekends, and we repeated it this year. And over the summer, we did one in Chicago, and we sort of said like, this is really something that we like, this model. From the get-go, we've wanted to bring it to London because that seemed obvious, like maybe the next place, So it took us a while to get there. It's not really on an anniversary of a record or anything, but we were able to find this time to do it, and excited to be here. And the show's sold out, and I think it'll be a lot of fun.
So you're doing 3 shows in London over the weekend. It finishes with a show at a venue called the Lexington on Sunday, and as part of that, in the afternoon, you are going to have a traditional British roast with a bunch of fans. Where does that idea come from?
Well, I think Dave, our manager, thought of it. It was sort of modeling the weekend we did last summer in Chicago, where we did 2 shows in a club roughly the size of the Electric Ballroom, and then we did one at the Empty Bottle, which is more like the size of Lexington, a smaller one. Mm-hmm. So we thought, let's maybe do one that's just sort of almost like too small, And but then we said, since it's a Sunday, you can do a smaller show. Obviously, the big show's on the weekends, nights, and Sunday is for the diehards, right? So it's smaller. And we said, well, how do we tie it in? And we thought the Sunday roast would be a cool thing that would make sense and might be a fun, angle to it. I don't know how much, there's always a tricky thing about eating and playing music. So I don't know how much eating any of us can do, but we can certainly hang out. And I think over the years, I think we have settled into some Sunday roasts on days off over here and things like that. And funny enough, up from the Lexington on Pentonville Road there's what used to be a Jury's Inn. I think it's a DoubleTree now.
It is,
but that was sort of headquarters for the Hold Steady for a long time. When we'd always stay at that hotel, and it saw some of our best and worst moments. So it's kind of funny. We've never played the Lexington before. It used to be something else, I think. Or maybe it was always the Lexington. I don't know. We never played there before, but I've certainly been there a number of times.
Talk to me about the traditional British roast. Are you a fan then? Are you on the menu on Sunday? You've got classic pork. You've got some chicken on there. There's a vegan nut roast. What are you going to go for?
If I eat, I think I would go for chicken. It seems like the best pre-show protein. And
do you have to think strategically before a show?
Yeah, when I'm 46 at this point, so more so than ever, you have to kind of think of strategically about your food. I mean, you don't want to get up there and feel. I feel like my best shows are when I'm hungry. And so like I feel like if you're too sated, if like you've had enough to eat, or if you're comfortable, like your mind wanders, and your mind wandering is like the last thing you want on stage, because then you're forgetting lyrics. We have a lot of words. So I think like coming on stage a little bit hungry is best. So loading down with food, I try, I think most singers probably go for 3 hours before or something like that. You need to kind of give it a pretty good buffer, and we'll see on that one. But it'll be a lot of fun either way. Every year I quit drinking for Lent. Mm-hmm. So, but this kind of is right in the middle of Lent. So I saw up ahead. So this year I started Lent 2 weeks early, so I could take what I'm calling a European exception.
Okay. Taking a hiatus from Lent just for these shows.
Well, I'm going. My girlfriend's coming over, and we're going to Paris and Amsterdam after. So I figured Lent needed a break.
Talk to me about those early memories then of coming over to London with the Hold Steady, staying at what used to be the Jury's Inn on Pentonville Road. For people listening to this, that's a hotel that a lot of bands often stay at when they come to London for the first time, international bands, because it's right in the centre of town. It's close to a lot of the venues that bands often come and play. And the hotel bar there, if walls could speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are your
There
memories
was-
from staying there?
There was, I mean, my favorite memory of staying there was one morning where I'm sure the hotel wouldn't want us to say this, but that we were up. We'd gone to like the off license, and we were up drinking in the lobby, and we were trying to be polite, but we were there until right as the sun was coming up. The manager came over and said, "Guys, you've actually been fantastically quiet through this." And, it really hasn't been a problem, but you are still drinking at 6 in the morning, and the breakfast people are going to come down soon, and I don't want you to scare them. So if you could go back up to your rooms now, we'd appreciate it. And I thought that was a reasonable rock and roll interaction,
Yeah.
We stayed up late, but we didn't cause too many problems. So that was pretty good. We had such, '07 is when Boys and Girls came out. We actually came over once before that. We played one show with Les Avifav at the Islington Academy. I think that's
Yeah,
what.
it's just literally around the corner from that
Yeah,
hotel.
but we didn't really have a record out then over here. So we kind of came and never followed up. So there was this one isolated show that happened and then nothing. But then we came over on Boys and Girls in America, and it did quite well. And it was really a whirlwind, playing shows and people showing up repeatedly. In that first year especially, we did a lot of cool things. We played with Kings of Leon over at the Astoria. Was that what it's called? Yeah.
That was a legendary venue in London.
Yeah, so
right
we got
in the center of town.
We got that one under our belt, before it went down, and played a couple shows at the Borderline that were kind of crazy really early on, and then just kept coming back and made a lot of friends here. I think that's the biggest and most important thing. Made a lot of friends that always wanted us to keep coming back.
You already mentioned it, the Hold Steady community of fans. In a way, it's an unusual thing now to have the type of fandom that the Hold Steady has, because you have a really dedicated fan base who like to talk about the band, like to share stories, like to come and see you. Like, I imagine when you play this run of shows, there are probably fans that are going to come on every night, and like you already said, they go and meet up, they have a drink beforehand, they chat about memories, they chat about new records, things like that. How do you view that fandom of your band? Is it something that you really cherish and always want to nurture? Are you protective over it?
Yeah, it's a huge part of what we do. I mean, it's things it's how we kind of arrange things. It's what we think about. It's what we talk about. It was from the get-go something we wanted to foster. I was really into hardcore growing up, and I thought, well, what if there was some of that community, the scene, so to speak, in a band that wasn't necessarily hardcore, more a classic rock band, but had this kind of thing. And pretty early on, when we started playing shows, for whatever reason, people started to travel, and you'd say wow, that guy's been in the front row 4 nights in a row. Let's see if he's here tomorrow. And you could kind of pick him out. And then a really cool thing happened at some point where there was a message board where fans would talk to each other. But everyone was using handles, So someone went to a show and said, well, I was there, but I didn't know what any of you guys looked like. And so someone else said, all right, well, I'm going to put together T-shirts. And it was called The Unified Scene, which is based on a lyric. And if you give me your number, say you want number 13 and you give me your size, I'll send one to you free. And there were several runs of these where people sort of paid it forward. Someone said, I'll do the next round. And you could make a roster, and you'd say, I'm number 12. So I'm going to wear my shirt at the show. If you're looking for me, you can see on the master list, Craig Finn's number 12, or, Dog Guy or whatever,
Yeah.
And you say, hey, Dog Guy. And I'm like, hey, I'm Cat Man or whatever. And so then they know each other. And then that was really grew the community a lot, and people really felt a part of something. And, this weekend, in Brooklyn, we had people from all over Europe, New Zealand, Australia, all over the U.S., Canada, that flew in. They see each other. And, I know there's a lot of Americans in town tonight. There's people I know from Norway, from New Zealand, people from all over the world coming in this weekend. I think it's as much to be a part of that as to see the band, I mean, and that's something we've deliberately fostered, and I think is very important.
When something as organic happens like that, has there ever been an instance of a Hold Steady wedding that you're aware of, or anything, people that have met via coming together over the band who are that are still coming to shows together or anything like that?
All the time on social media, people send me photos of their wedding and say Our first show was in Louisville, Kentucky 4 years ago. Our first date, was a show.
Right.
We had an engagement of 2 fans in Chicago that we kind of facilitated from the stage, that kind of thing. So yeah, there's Hold Steady weddings. There's Hold Steady.
Hopefully not too many Hold Steady divorces.
Yeah, well, they probably will happen. Some will, statistically, right?
Yeah. When I was reading about the shows that you played in Brooklyn at the end of last year, you made reference to a guy called Mosh Pit Josh.
Yeah.
Who's Mosh Pit Josh?
Mosh Pit Josh is our merch guy, and Josh Gurdon. And Josh has worked for us a long time. He's become a great friend, but he'd done merch for kind of a lot of more like Hatebreed and Killswitch Engage, some kind of heavier bands. Heavier bands. I think he so much as said when he started working with us that he was happy to be on tour selling T-shirts, but the music wasn't really his thing.
Okay.
But then, cut to a few months later, he declared Hold Steady was his favorite band, and he got a Hold Steady tattoo. And now he occasionally, if the night's right, joins us on Stay Positive. He's able to kind of provide more of a hardcore feel to this. This song is kind of a homage to 80s hardcore, and he's able to kind of bring it a little harder than I can.
He's got a gruff voice.
He's got a gruff voice, a gruff exterior, I would say.
We talked a bit about the Hold Steady community. What about the Hold Steady yourselves as a band? Obviously, we're 14, 15 years into the band?
Yeah, 15.
Yeah,
15
does it still feel exciting waking up to be in the Hold Steady every day?
It does, and partially because of a lot of it's because of the community, but I feel like it's changed a little bit over the years. Obviously, everyone's changed as people. If you have to in 15 years, but I think one of the most exciting things right now is that Franz went away for a while, and we got Steve Selvage on guitar. So we added, Franz left, we added another guitar player. Now Franz is back. We're at a 6-piece lineup, and it's really I'm not pandering. It is the best Hold Steady. So it's like we're in 2018, and we have the best lineup of the Hold Steady we've ever had.
Yeah.
So that's incredible to have both Steve and Franz on stage is a blessing, and we were able to do some new songs, which is exciting too. So I mean, it feels really good, and we aren't doing 250 dates anymore, but that's fine. We've done that, and I think that what we're doing now, it makes a lot of sense, and it's been really rewarding.
When you have a dedicated audience like you have with the Hold Steady, what effect does that have on your approach to writing new material? When you've made 6 albums, so do you worry about the reaction that you might have from that audience, or do you think, I can only make music for myself, or ourselves rather? If we make a divisive record, if we do something a little bit different, if we split those people's opinions on our new stuff, that's okay. That's part and parcel of being in a band.
I think more of the latter. I think that there's my view on everything is there's always more songs. When we started the Hold Steady, one of the things I was kind of adamant about or talked a lot about was to keep music coming. And so, not quite in the Guided by Voices pace, but something, an album a year was and that's what we did for the first 4 years.
Yeah.
And my thought is if you wait too long, then you kind of have to come up with a masterpiece, right? You have to come up with Sgt. Pepper's or something. And instead you can just be like, hey, we got 10 songs. You want to hear them? So what we've done the last 2, we recorded 4 songs in November. We put 2 out before the shows in Brooklyn. We just put 2 out this week. That's kind of connected to that logic. It's like, hey, here's 2 more songs. And, the way we've listened to music has changed a lot with Spotify, streaming, all that it doesn't, I think it's just kind of makes more sense at this point to not be going off for a month to record this album and then wait 7 months to ramp up to put it out and then go on this tour. I think everything else has changed, so I sort of feel like our outlook has to change too about how we put things out. And I don't know. I feel like you can look at it both ways, but having 6 records out, and that people seem to like or our fans really like, I don't think there's much we could do that would at least erase those 6. You could have a misstep, but it wouldn't be huge.
Have you always been somebody who embraces change and sees yourself as adaptable? You mentioned it there, the evolving ways that people consume music, they listen to their music. Even this week, there's been loads of chat about that in the UK, because obviously in the music press arena, NME, the print magazines, the last issue comes out today.
I just got it.
You picked it up. You've got one for posterity. Okay. Probably looks different from the NME that you first were featured in.
Yes, quite a bit. Skinnier.
Yeah. And it comes in the same week when other magazines have relaunched. Cochrane, for example, was relaunched this week. Loud and Quiet. We've literally just put out our relaunch issue today. So things are always changing. Do you find that, do you concern yourself about change, or do you just think move with the times and you're quite lucid about that sort of thing?
I wish I could say I was like, I certainly don't see myself as a maverick or someone on the forefront, because I think personally I'm slow to change. But I think, you're just sort of, if you're out there, you can see the reality of like, wow, I mean, even like when you put out a record, people consume it so quickly. Like, you work so hard, and then people are like, all right, when's the next one? And it's like, well, that one is only 10 days old, Yeah. Like, so maybe it makes more sense to give people, I mean, I always love bands, especially from over here, from the Smiths would be the perfect example, where they kind of had these singles come out, and they looked similar, and there was or the Clash, like where you're really the singles thing, and maybe you'd heard half the album by the time it came out, but I like that. I think that's exciting, and there's B-sides, and there's that's an exciting model, and maybe something that more bands might go towards rather than this album thing, because it feels like right now, it feels like on the business side of things, like a lot of bands get a lot of press the week their record comes out, and then someone else's record comes out. So to have a steady stream, and I also think that maybe with the way that we listen to music with Spotify or the streaming, having a body of work might become more and more important.
Yeah, exactly. So if somebody discovers the Hold Steady tomorrow and they go on Spotify, there is an opportunity to listen to 80 songs if they want to.
You put it all on shuffle, and your whole afternoon, you know?
Is there even a small part of you that thinks, oh, but I want people to listen to those 10 songs in that order, because that's the narrative that runs through that record?
You do, but you realize that you're not in control of that. I mean, I think if you were to put out an album, sequence it, record it, sequence it, put the artwork together, all that. Of course, you want people to experience it in the way that you've worked towards. But once it's, when I think about Almost Killed Me, Boys and Girls America, well, those records are 10 years old now. They can be listened to. If the song comes on the jukebox, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Not when I'm there.
It's funny, isn't it? Most people feel like they want to just become invisible if they're in a public space, in a shop, or in a taxi, in their radio, and it comes on the radio. Does that feel the same? It
sounds like, I can't think. It sounds like I'm yelling in my own ear.
In between releasing albums with the Whole Steady, you've made 3 solo records. It seems like you rarely come off tour. Is there a year in the last 15 or so where you haven't been out and played shows?
No. I mean, some have been busier than others, but one of the reasons for the solo stuff is it allows me to work at the pace which I want to, which is a lot. There's the thing about getting a band together, where the Whole Steady is very much a band, so it doesn't happen unless we can all
organize it.
all organize it. So with the solo records, it's kind of like I can just sort of record, and make it and go on tour, or whether it's with a band or myself solo, or and it allows me to do that, and it allows me to do musically different things too.
And going out on tour last year, interesting, turbulent times in not just American politics, international politics. What was your experience of getting out on the road last year? It was quite a unique year. So when you were out and you were having conversations with fans, or when you were traveling between states and big cities, what was the kind of feeling that left you with?
Last year I did sort of an interesting thing. We did 3 different tours that were living room tours.
Okay.
Where we went into people's living rooms, and we did 2 over in the States, one in kind of the U.S., mainly the Northeast, and one on the West Coast, and then some over here too. And when I say living rooms, I mean some living rooms, especially over here, they were kind of more non-traditional venues. Some living rooms, but also like art galleries, record stores. Yeah. There was some offices, anywhere people had a space. And those were very interesting. And the first one happened during the inauguration of Donald Trump for the United States, and as well as the first Women's March. We're all on that same one weekend. And I remember those felt very interesting because To invite people into your living room to hear music is, strangers, is sort of a revolutionary act on its own. And it made me feel better. And there were nice moments. I mean, I think the record I made last year, We All Want the Same Things, it was recorded and titled before the election and all that, but or at least mainly. But it was certainly a reaction to the election cycle in part, and the idea that it was supposed to be an empathetic record, that a lot of people, were feeling like they weren't heard and trying to understand about people who kind of might be throwing some sort of Hail Mary. But it's scary. I mean, you see, you get to travel a lot. You get to see places that you wouldn't, you might not go on vacation, and try to understand at least. But I think we're living in divided times, and I think it's seeping into everyone's art on some level or another.
Did you get a feeling that people feel isolated because it's very easy to kind of live your life online and express your or express or not express your kind of feelings on the subject, but then coming to a show and being amongst other people is something different, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, and that's why I think as we go forward, these shows are more and more important. I think, talking about either be it the living room shows that I did last year or the community that's around the Hold Steady, that getting in a room together with a bunch of people who love rock and roll, or I don't know, your football team or whatever it may be, is more and more important than it ever was, because we can kind of fool ourselves into thinking we're talking to people. I was talking with someone, Brian Koppelman, on another podcast, but a friend of mine, and he was talking about a friend of his that had passed away, and he said, we hadn't gotten together because I was under the impression we'd caught up. Because I saw his Instagram and you could see, Facebook, whatever it was. They're like, oh, he's on, he went to the beach this weekend. But, it's different than so I think it's almost something that we have to work on now.
Well, I think we're all guilty of presenting our internet version of ourselves, aren't we?
It's almost, it's social media is PR almost inherently, right? No one's clean the bathroom today, want to see? Yeah. It's no, I went to the beach, I climbed this mountain, here I am at the top of this mountain, this amazing meal. Yeah. It's not just I ate what was left over in the fridge, want to see a picture of it. No one ever does that. So it's always this most heightened version of ourselves.
So it's important to step outside the front door and
be
with other people.
I think with being in person is really, really important. We all have those. I didn't know about that guy at first, but it turns out he's really cool.
Yeah.
I ended up talking to him at this party. I think that the more of those we have, I think the world's probably better. But it's hard. Look, I'm not saying I'm above it. I struggle with it very much. So
it's a weird feeling when you're naturally a private person.
Yeah.
But you exist in this space where you're almost expected to share certain things about you, and just by default, information is out there about you.
Yeah.
And so it feels like it's just kind of this awkward thing, isn't it? Where you're sort of forced into having to sort of present something, but maybe you don't want to present too much because ultimately you're just kind of wow, it's none of your business.
Yeah, well, yeah, and also that everything's kind of permanent. So if you say I don't like this, well, you could say I don't like this baseball team. And then someone, that's out there. So then 2 years later, it's I guess you don't like that baseball team. And it's oh no, this is what we're talking about still. So you become kind of guarded in that sense.
Let's talk about the Hold Steady then and your plans for this year. You're here in London, you're going to play these 3 shows. What does the next 6 months or so hold for you? Are you going to head back to Brooklyn and continue recording tracks together when you feel inclined, or is there a plan to get together and make the next body of work?
It's all being figured out. I kind of like what we're doing now, which is, but we don't have any songs, so we have to write those first. But I kind of like this approach we've been doing. I think I'd like to do more of these weekend kind of things. We don't have anything to announce. My idea is kind of to proceed as we are, but with more of them. I'd like to go to more places, but it has to make sense. Obviously the cities like New York, London, Chicago are probably the ones that kind of can support it, and with the numbers.
Once you've done the traditional British roast, though, you're going to have to go to Rome and do the pizza party. You have to go to Australia and have the barbecue.
Yeah,
you do
yeah.
realise what you've started for yourself, Craig.
Yeah, that gives us something to shoot for. Maybe we could partner with the Sunday. Maybe that's something. The Sunday could always be a culinary adventure.
An adventure in international cuisine.
Yeah.
Just finally, I want to talk to you a little bit about lyrics, because over the years, rightly so, people have focused very much on your lyrics. I'm interested to know, where do the seeds of the ideas come from? That often you paint pictures of characters. And so does that come from people watching? Does it come from reading? Does it come from just observation? Like, where does the process begin?
All of the above. I've always been a big reader, especially of fiction, so I've always wanted to tell stories. And I'm a terrible eavesdropper, so which is New York is like the most amazing place to live.
Do you just get a coffee and just kind of like sit on the sidewalk?
Yeah, like I'll in the park or in the subway especially. Like the big move is you put on your headphones, but you don't put on any music.
Classic.
And so I've gotten a lot of stuff through that. Walking around, motion, travel, that kind of thing. Signs, like seeing signs on the thing. I like really specific things and, like things that suggest stories. I was my parents didn't have a lot of records, but they had some when I was growing up. And one of the records they did have was Paul Simon's Greatest Hits. And I used to listen to that record a lot. I've never really thought of him as a big influence, but I was about a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, I was walking somewhere and I was in a store. And they were playing that song "Slip Sliding Away,"
Mm-hmm.
And there's a line he says, and it's in like the second verse. He says, "Dolores, I live in fear." And I said, "Oh my God, that's like bringing up a woman's name in the middle of the second verse. That's something I love. Like like that put a name in the story that wasn't that. It's not like that's the name of the song. That's like it's just this detail. Like we didn't know this woman's name until, and I was like, I got that from that. Like, and it was, but I really do like kind of manipulating the ideas of specifics and generals. General. So I think a lot about that. Like, do I name the street? Or do you say you're on the street? And creating a balance there is something that is always like kind of a big part of my work.
Have you ever thought about taking yourself to another country to make an entire record for it to reflect that place? I guess I'm thinking of, I don't know, like a band. An example would be somebody like maybe even the Foo Fighters did this a few years ago, where Dave Grohl took himself around the country with that song, Sonic Highways.
Sonic Highways, yeah.
And he went to a city, didn't he? And the songs were a product of the people that he'd met and the sounds of the city and the buildings and the places.
Yeah.
So has that ever been like a tempting idea?
I've thought about that in not so much other countries, but like sort of smaller U.S. cities, places that people don't always go, I do get really inspired when I go to a new place, but I've never done that. But that might be, I've always thought that might be a good thing if I get writer's block, but I've never gotten writer's block so far.
Oh, yeah, touch wood. Let's hope that doesn't happen. You're a fan of lyricism in general, lyric writing, including, I've heard you speak in the past about your admiration for the lyrics in hip hop, for example. Mm-hmm. What are some of your favorite rappers, some of your favorite hip hop records from the past?
I feel like I'm really out of touch with hip hop now. I used to not be like when I was really in touch with when I was in Lifter Puller, my old band in the 90s. There was a group, Rhymesayers, coming up in Minneapolis that were kind of like parallel to us, that were friends of ours. So I was like, knew them, and that was an era of hip hop I knew, like, felt like I was more inclined to. The Wu-Tang Forever, I think, is like, to me, like lyrically one of the most insane and cool records. I tend to like very instructional drug rap, like Ghostface Killah, Fish Scale, the Clips. I like to find out how to break things down and make a profit. So anything that kind of details that for me.
A bit of business learning with your hip hop.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Craig, I hope you have a great weekend in London. Enjoy the 3 shows you're playing. Enjoy your Sunday roast.
Thank you.
And we look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
Midnight Chats is a Loud and Quiet podcast. Music courtesy of Gold Panda. Search Midnight Chats on iTunes for more episodes and to subscribe. For more information, visit loudandquiet.com.